All right, I think we're on. So welcome to Aiming for Access. I am your host for today's bonus episode, Elizabeth Barker. I am a senior technical assistant and project director of AIM. And we are here discussing the Department of Justice American with Disabilities Act Title II update. With me today, I have my colleague Louise and my colleague and friend Rick Ferry. So if you both want to say hello.
Sure, I'll start. Hi, everybody. I'm Luis Perez. I'm a disability and digital inclusion lead at CAST, and really excited about these updates to the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is the civil rights law that has had the most significant impact in my life. And I often tell people I'm lucky to live in the time that I get to live, because I can only imagine what life was like before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is continuing that legacy that we have in the United States of the Americans with Disabilities Act assisting and really making sure that we have more opportunity to be engaged in society. So I'll pass it over to Rick.
Thanks, Luis. And it's funny why you're saying that, because I hang out with lawyers as part of what I do. And lawyers are fast to tell you that the ADA is one of the most litigated laws in the history of American lawmaking. So it definitely it had an impact, right? My name is Rick Ferry, and I'm the head of accessibility and UDL for the Savvis Learning Company. And then I have a number of other roles. I've been a long time, very lucky to have been associated for CAS for, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell you because then I'll date myself, but as a subject matter expert for them. And so I'm here helping Liz and Luis talk about the rule, the impact, and some of the things that have happened since it was announced.
Yeah, thank you. We are so grateful that you are here. And I do want to give a few notes and information. For one, we are recording for the audience so that you know. Second, of course, we are CAST and we are doing things with universal design for learning in mind. And there have been multiple ways that we have represented this information, and we want to continue to do so because we feel that schools, state departments of ed, local agencies, and ed tech may not be aware of some of these new updates. And we want to keep informing our audience and keep informing you all to stay up to date on these updates. So a couple things. Skip Stahl, one of our CAST founders, wrote an incredible overview for Title II, and that is available on our website. And if you don't know our website, it is aem.cast.org. For those of you in this webinar, you can find that in the chat. But he did write a wonderful overview called Learning on the Go, ADA Title II Updates and Requirements. The other place I want you all to be aware of is our AIM Cafe. We did do a small episode with Rick, but it's a great place for people to come, bring your coffee, have a conversation, and discuss these things together. And that can also be found on our website. And then lastly, this wonderful webinar and interview will be recorded for our podcast. And if you don't know our podcast, it is called The Accessible Learning Experience, where Luis and Kelly are the wonderful hosts of the podcast, and you can learn a great information around accessibility and AIM. Lastly, I do want to point to the fact sheet on ada.gov about the new rule in accessibility, and it is a really good reference to go to. So with that, I want to jump in and get this conversation going. I have my coffee. It is still early on the West Coast, so I will be drinking some coffee and having this conversation with you, Rick. Can you just give us an overview or give the audience an overview of the ADA Title II new regulations and updates?
Sure. And I think I'm not going to get into a lot of details because some of the references and documents Liz has already mentioned are available. But in April of this year, right, the DOJ it's actually not a law, it's a rule. And it's rulemaking involving the ADA, particularly Title II. And Title II, and I won't get into the weeds on this because I do hang out with lawyers, but I'm more fun than them, is how universities and schools get in scopes. Lots of federal agencies and entities are, but it's Title II specifically that ties in public schools and universities. And so, as everyone knows, they made 2.1 AA WCAG, which is the W3C standard, as a federal baseline for accessibility requirements for all entities that are under this broad. And we'll get into this, Liz, a little bit about what puts people in scope. And they have some guidelines on dates in terms of when you have to comply with that. We'll talk about that, I think.
Yeah.
But the gist is that for schools, which is why we're mostly here on the education side, right, is that for larger districts by June of 2026, they are going to have to use 2.1 compliant technology. And I'm using the word technology in the broadest sense. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then for smaller entities, and that would be under 50,000, they have till June 2027 to comply with the rule.
Okay.
And I think we can get into the details of that, but what it really is, it's a federal baseline for accessibility established for entities that fall under the federal purview. Lots of states have had sort of different levels of compliance. Some have had 2.1 for a while. Texas, as a state, many of you know, has had 2.1 compliance for a long time. Some districts have too, but states have been kind of all over the place. And frankly, I don't blame them. I think everyone's been waiting for the federal government to establish this. And it has been a long time coming. We've been going back to before everyone thought the Obama administration would be the one to push this forward, but it's just been very complicated. But finally it's here. And now that we have the dates and the deadline is we can, to support Luis's excitement about is we need to get going because there's some things we need to do between now and June 2026, particularly in schools.
Yes.
And-
How do you feel?
And,
Oh, go ahead.
and this is Luis, just to provide some background knowledge, just in case you're new to all of this. WCAG, when we talk about WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the international accessibility standard created by the World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as the W3C. And it often kind of informs national accessibility laws. And so here in the United States, we have a federal law called Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act that's informed by WCAG. And now this is really exciting because we're bringing WCAG into the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a civil rights law. And so, for the first time, as Rick mentioned, it covers schools and public universities and community colleges, but really the rule applies to all local and state government entities. And so we are, typically community colleges and universities and school districts fall under that category. So really excited to have this be part of our civil rights laws.
Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Thank you both. So I'm curious though on how you feel. Do they make you feel hopeful? Do they bring up some concern or worries around what needs to be done in order to reach these? Yeah, tell me your initial thoughts when these, other than excitement, like, yes, we're all excited that there are some regulations.
It's interesting, Liz, and you and I have had this conversation, right?
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily a surprise. I think there's been lots and lots of conversations about getting to a level of accessibility. And I think some schools are farther ahead than others. Some of the providers, like Savvis, are farther ahead than others, right? And I think what worries me, once I get past my excitement, is that there hasn't been as much conversation or chatter as I think there needs to be. The way the rule works is that the obligations are actually on the entity. So the obligations to make sure that they're using compliant stuff is on the schools. Now that gets pushed to the third-party contractors. It's very explicit in the rule, but the schools sort of have to take the initiative on this, right? And it isn't just learning management systems. It's every piece of technology they use. It could be their attendance taking, their whiteboards, right? Anything that is technology that would be accessed by the students or the teachers or whoever in the school has to be accessible. And that's a very broad scope. Like in my role with Savvis, we're worried about our curriculum and our learning and management stuff, but the schools have to think about their whole infrastructure. And I think that as I get the opportunity to talk to different state and LEAs, the local districts, I always say, hey, have you heard about the rule? I'm always trying to find out what they're going through because the burden is on the schools. The sooner they can address it, I think they'll get past the deer in the headlights initial panic and start to make a plan, right?
Yes.
But I think the thing that, and we can talk about this more, to me, it's critical that the schools get their IT folks involved in this discussion, right? It isn't just curriculum providers. It isn't just AT folks. It's everybody. And I think that IT is such a critical backbone for all the schools or districts or even the states, if you want to expand it out, that I would like to see those conversations start sooner. And we are, there are some states that are moving and some aren't, but I just feel like there needs to be a little bit more given. Maybe June 2026 sounds far away for some people. It does not.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not that far away, especially for those of us that have been in the accessibility world. We tend to know how long something like this can take, not due to people not wanting to, but due to some processes and things that can be in place, or old technology, or the retrofitting that may or may not need to happen. So I'm thinking, Rick, as you're talking about this and putting myself back into my teaching role and as a teacher, and somewhat being fearful. So what are the steps, or what are some prioritization that could happen within the school district or within the state to support schools moving forward with
Well,
this?
and I think and I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Because it does need to be practical. It needs to be aware of how schools are not corporations, right? They don't
Yeah,
function like corporations. They're not budgeted or staffed like corporations, right?
right.
And so one of the very first things is to take an inventory, right? Decide, what are all the things that you have that are in scope for this rule, and then start to determine where they are on the compliance level, right? And so that involves reaching out to places like Savvis or Google or Microsoft. And I don't know if folks know what VPATs are, but there are things you can ask for information about where is your product on the compliance side. Because what happens when people buy stuff from places like Savvis, it's all done through contracts or POs, right? And there's terms and conditions in there. And a lot of those terms and conditions back when these things were purchased didn't have accessibility regulations. Some did, some, right? So one of the things will be your current stuff. You may not be able to go to your purchase order, your contract, and find out what the compliance level was, right? You may have to actually ask the providers, hey, and most of the providers should be able to provide you with a VPAT or an ACR or something that shows where they are on the compliance towards 2.1. The other piece of that would be to make sure when you're asking for where they are in terms of compliance is to get the most current version of the ACR template that incorporates all the 2.1 guidelines, because there's a bunch of older ones floating around in use that don't have the most up-to-date thing. But I think that first step, if I was running a school or a district, what I would do is identify a team of people, right, that are accountable. And it could be your AT folks, your curriculum supervisors, and your IT folks. That's the key. And get them together as a team and just say, okay, let's take a deep breath. We're going to get this done. Start with that inventory. Start to get if you don't know what your baseline is, you really can't do anything until you have an idea of where you are on the compliance level.
Yeah. Luis, do you want to add more? I saw you putting some things in the chat. Do you want to clarify anything or add more to that?
Yeah, I was going to add that on the AIM Center website, we do have a resource that explains what the VPAT is. And the VPAT has some limitations because it's usually a vendor self-report, but it's helpful when it comes to like finding out this information that Rick is mentioning, making comparisons among projects to see which ones are further along, if you will, in terms of reaching that WCAG 2.1 standard. So we encourage you to check out that resource where we take a fictitious company. No feelings were hurt in the production of this resource. We just created a company, and then we developed a sort of a fictitious VPAT, so you can see the different parts that are part of that document. And the completed VPAT is called the Accessibility Conformance Report. So that's the completed template that you actually get from the vendor. So when you hear terms like VPAT and ACR, that's the relationship between the two. I would also say that, hopefully this will encourage vendors to create accessibility statements and to have those be easy to find, right? So that you don't have to hunt for this information. So I would say that that's like an initial first step, is to find a place on your website where you can include like information on that's easy to understand on where you are on this journey. And that's part of being transparent. And then the last thing that I would mention is quality indicator 1. We have the AIM quality indicators, right? And quality indicator 1 is developing a well-coordinated system. And so to Rick's point, I think that's what this is going to take, is to make sure that we have representation from across, if it's a university, across the university or the institution. If it's a school district, from across the school district. That includes AT, IT, student information, curriculum, like all of these areas, because even your parking, if you're a university, your parking app needs to be accessible. It's everything, really. I mean, we're not lying when we say that.
Yes, and yeah, and I think too, it's important to point out that this doesn't necessarily fall on your special education teachers.
Yeah.
That this is, as Luis, as you stated earlier, and Rick, that you were pointing to earlier, this is ADA, right? This is civil rights. So this is access everywhere and to all. And I just want to reiterate that, so there's no confusion, that your AT folks, your assistive technology folks, will understand how assistive technology functions. And they are an important piece, because you definitely want to make your development usable. So there's a partnership there that needs to happen going forward. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because that can be sometimes confusing.
Yeah.
Um,
And special ed is the first place. Anytime accessibility comes
That's
up,
right.
that's the first place everyone runs to. One
That's-
other thing Luis made me think of, and I think, Liz, we were going to cover this anyway.
Mhm.
The rule itself talks about websites and mobile apps, but
Yes.
that's not all, right? I think the problem is the reason it's everything is that any piece of technology that is used in a school that a person needs to access in order to successfully complete the learning and the assessment, whatever it is in scope. So let's say it's a whiteboard or something. A lot of those things attach through the web, right? And so what I try to get folks to think about, instead of saying, well, is this an app or is this a website or whatever,
Mhm.
it's a digital interface. Any place where someone is using a digital interface to accomplish what they need to in a school day, that's
Yeah.
in scope. And that's why it's documents, it's everything that, and I think that's what's initially a little scary for people. Like, what do you mean
Absolutely.
everything, right? It is everything, but it's still a finite,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And you just have to, and I do think that's one of the things we've encountered is folks are saying, well, what are apps? Is it just apps? And you can see why they get confused, because they could be using a web
Absolutely.
interface to access an app, right? And
Right.
that's where LMSs get in, your attendance taking. This also covers parent and interfaces, right?
Yes.
Community interfaces. Now, a lot of those are web-based, but some of them are applications, and there's SaaS, there's a whole bunch of technical things. But I think it isn't just about websites,
Yeah.
which is one of the things you might run into initially.
So you're making me think of the next question I had in my mind was about the companies and organizations that pre-K to 12 higher ed will partner with and procure or source, whether that's an assessment, whether that's a curriculum, whether that's an app. Uh, Talk to me about what those organizations and companies need to be thinking about in this moment with this new rule. What are some things that they need to be doing as well in this partnership with states and local agencies?
Well, I think one of the things, and I'll just speak out of personal experience, is that a lot of the initial discussion has been around materials, products, services that already have been contractually purchased, right? So the terms and the conditions for those products are already set.
Yeah.
And you can't come in from the outside because there's an outside thing and change those terms. And so one of the challenges we're all going to have to work, schools, providers, is in where we are on the baseline. How do we get to where we need to be by the deadlines, right?
Mhm.
And in some cases, and the way schools work, as you know, right? States have standards, districts have standards, and a lot of people's pay and compensation and success is based on how well kids are doing, right? So they're loath to change things, right? Now, whether the standards change or the content changes. And so one of the interesting challenges is that schools, this is less of an issue in higher ed, but in K-12, you can have stuff that's 7 years, right? We want to use this for 7 years. It may or may not have language in there about updating, right?
Mhm.
So one of the challenges this is going to cause is that it fundamentally, you need to look at everything, and you may have to look at updating a lot of the curriculum and a lot of the tools and software, right? It isn't going to be, oh, let's just fix this, right? Because some of this stuff is, the DNA is old enough that it isn't going to be cost effective to fix. And I think that's why I'd like to see these conversations going more, right? Because
Yes.
schools don't have unlimited money, the providers don't have unlimited resources, right? And they can't give stuff away. So I think sort of looking together and say, hey, this is where we can get to. This makes the most sense. And this helps the kids the most. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is to look at your populations and make sure those priority things are the first things, right?
Yeah.
Because, and that's not to say things can't have to be fully compliant at some point, but there are some things, you know, keyboard navigable, right? There's some basic stuff that really has to be there. And that's how I would encourage schools to prioritize that. That's how we look at it too, right? To say, look,
Right.
this is an old product, but we might be able to get this so that it's keyboard navigable, right? There's some things that affect broad numbers of students. I was thinking about third-party compatibility, like on your IPs, if you have technology that's not compatible, if you have old curriculum and your AT doesn't work on it, then part of that accessibility makes sure it's compatible with that AT. So I mean, for this phone call, it's too long to get in the weeds on this, but part of this is to really prioritize what's going to have the biggest bang for the students as soon as possible, right? And then the other things you can get to. So.
And Rick, you've rubbed off on me from previous conversations, and I would say get things in writing.
Yes.
That's something that I've learned from you. Like, try to make sure that when you're having these conversations with vendors, you know, their marketing people will tell you, yes, it's accessible. It's really easy to do that when you're trying to make a sale. So make sure that you get things in writing. That's why I emphasize the need for that accessibility statement and that VPAD and the most current accessibility conformance report and a roadmap. If things are not accessible, by when will they be accessible? Because we are working with a finite deadline here, depending on the size of the entity of 2 years or 3 years. So make sure you get that timeline as part of the contract conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical, Luis, because it's not going to be possible for the school to replace every single thing they have with a due 2.1 version by this date, right? However, to have a plan that says, here's where we're going to be on this date and here's the next, right? That to me is a defensible, practical position to be, right? And so that's why I think it's important to have those conversations. And that's going back to what I said earlier about having that team, because if you're just going to have IT talk to it, you're just going to get this blanket compliance checklist that doesn't actually make any sense in terms of, and I'm not trashing anybody or any groups on this, right? It's just, that's why you can't have the individual silos on this on their own. You need your special educators, your AT folks, your curriculum folks in with the IT guys to talk about what's the plan. And this includes Google's products, Microsoft's products, all the big vendors, right? Now, they're going to, hopefully, most of them are in pretty good shape right now. Then the other piece of this, Liz and we didn't talk about this, and we can talk about it later if you want, but the teacher created material. There's been a lot of discussion about what do we do with that stuff that's teacher created, that's put in the classroom, right? And so that's something, given the CAST and AIM Center's long experience with that, I think you would have great support for teachers or educators that are going to start uploading material.
Absolutely. Thank you for the plug. Yes, we are working on.
It wasn't a plug. It was a heartfelt, not no chatty news.
I'm teasing. I'll take it. No, we are working on lots of how-to materials. Kelly Suiting, as this group tends to know really well, does a marvelous job along with Michelle Sariano to create information and documents on how teachers can create things that are more accessible. So be looking to us for that going forward. It's absolutely going to be available. But to both your points, I think it's important for everyone to realize that both parties are at play here. You know, both we have to work together with vendors and publishers and folks going forward with our contracts and sourcing. And, you know, to Luis, your point, ensuring that there is an accessibility statement and really understanding, diving into those materials on what a voluntary product accessible template is, and what does that mean, and in understanding how to read one of those so that you, as a consumer, as a partner, a state or a school, know what you're getting. And I do think both need to have their roadmaps in play, right? Because vendors and publishers and outside sourcing, no one's going to be fully accessible right out of the gate. And you need to understand where the limits are, and knowing if there's going to be movement going forward, what that looks like. What are their roadmaps? What are the school's roadmaps? And are there some overlap, and can they have that? So also, so you can show, yes, we are working on this. Yes, we are doing these things. And and here's where we are going together. I think it might open up the partnerships between the two in a way that's really supportive for students and people with disabilities going forward. Any reactions to that?
No, I think that to me, because it is a good thing, right? It's going to be a good thing, and we just have to remember that and just sort of hold hands and march towards it as practically as possible, right? So,
And I think the reason why I'm excited, it's nice to have a rule to point to,
Yeah.
right? So in the past, we would have these conversations, and it was like accessibility was in the air, like like it had been sprayed into the room, but it hadn't settled yet. Well, a rule makes it settle, right? And so now we have something that we can point people to, and it really facilitates these conversations. It provides a lot of clarity on what's expected, right? So we're not leaving these things kind of like ambiguous. I know it's a lot of work. This is not going to be easy, but I think by having the rule, it gives us a goal, right? It gives us a landmark to aim for, and so that's where my excitement is. I'm hoping that we can build on this and get Title III. I'm getting a little greedy. So I want Title III rules related to the same ideas, but we'll take Title II as a start. It's a good starting point.
Right. And we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to ask you both, why should states and districts and schools start now? I mean, 2 or 3 years, this is when they need to have things in place. Can we quickly just say why it's important to get this going today?
well, and we've touched on this, Liz, right? It's just the scope and scale of stuff, and the fact that it isn't a group's responsibility. It isn't just IT's responsibility. It isn't just right. And so the school has to have a team-centered approach to it. And I, schools are not companies. I said at the beginning. And so even knowing what they have inventory-wise is sometimes a challenge for some schools. We have affluent school districts, we have rural, we have urban districts. These schools are all over the place in terms of their capabilities. And this, coming from the corporate world, this is a massive change management activity, right? And for those of you that understand change management, it's not necessarily easy for big companies. And so I think for the schools, the sooner they can put together a little SWAT team of folks together focused on this, the better. Because, and look, if they get done early, that's great. Right. But I do think waiting just cuts down the amount of time everyone has to make really thoughtful decisions about how you're going to get to where you need to be. So that's why start now. And I'm happy to have any discussions with anyone, bringing my perspective to it and my experience. I've made so many mistakes. You can benefit from all the errors I've made. And there's many years of errors. So I can tell you, don't do this. That didn't work. So
I can relate to that. Oh man, boy, can I relate to that. Luis, final words.
Well, I would just add that, we want for this to be impactful. Like Rick said, this is change management, but I would also call it's a culture. We want to build a culture of accessibility, right? So for this to be sustainable, impactful over the long run, that requires a culture shift, right? Culture change within organizations. And it requires breaking down silos. It requires building relationships. That's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take some time. And so I think the earlier you can get started, even if you're taking small steps, like Rick suggested, just get a group of people that are representative of different areas of the district or your institution, the better. So there's no time like the present.
Yeah. And then actually one more plug, and again, I'm not prompted for this. I think for the AIM Center to share best practices or things the states and districts are learning as they go. I think that's going to be critical, because you might as well learn from folks that are farther than ahead of you or doing it differently in the use. So the AIM Center would be a good resource to always keep an eye on, to say, hey, state X is doing this district is doing that. Testimonials or webinars like this where you have people talking about, hey, we did this, it didn't work. Any suggestion, right? I think any information sharing from the ground level would be super helpful for folks going forward.
Absolutely.
Well, Liz, can I finish with a really shameless plug?
Please, you go for it.
So we do have a UDL product certification at CAST, and accessibility is, as we know, it's a foundational component of UDL, and we have an accessibility baseline. That's part of that certification. So I encourage you to learn a little bit more. I've shared that in the chat. We can share that as part of the show notes for this podcast. But our goal is to really build a roster of tools over time that have achieved the certification, so that you as educators, right, can choose tools that have been vetted for not just accessibility, but accessibility plus, right, which is universal design for learning. How do we support variability in the classroom? So I apologize for the shameless plug, since I am with CAST, but it's something that I had a hand in developing, and would love for more products to know about, so that we can, again, make it easier for you by giving you, this certification or this badge that you can point to and make it easier for you to select tools.
Yes, and thank you, Luis, for that. And I want to mention there are a few questions in our QA. And while we don't have time for that, I will try and set up something where we address them in the podcast that will be recorded going forward. Perhaps at the end, Luis, we can do something to talk about a few of the questions. And with that, that is our time for today. And we so appreciate all of you coming and joining us in this conversation. We will keep this conversation going in various ways, as we do at CAST, in multiple means. And we appreciate you coming in and asking us questions so we can address them going forward. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate you both. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.